nation's history in the American Heritage Series. A closer look into our nation's history reveals surprising and irrefutable evidence of the Bible's influence on our founding fathers and our nation's Constitution. But does a biblically inspired Constitution make America a Christian nation? And is there a place for the Bible in today's modern political climate? Discover our nation's godly history in the American Heritage Series. America, this is your heritage.
The Constitution has produced a real stability and a real prosperity in America that make us quite different from other nations. And that Constitution was framed largely by Christian individuals who used many biblical ideas for what they did in that Constitution. So it's not a secular document. Now, we hear that it is. And one of the interesting textbooks I find in use across the nation is this document right here. This little textbook is called The Godless Constitution. Now, that's a fairly interesting title for a book, and it's written by a couple of professors. They go through and say, oh, it is a godless document. This nonsense about being religious people involved or religious ideas involved, it just doesn't happen.
So is that a cross there I see on the front of that book?
It almost looks like it. It looks like it. You know, one of the most interesting aspects of this book is not how many PhDs they have after their name, because they got plenty. It's at the back of the book. These guys, we've got their picture, we have their bio, and at the back of the book they tell us the sources for their claim, because they claim that it's a godless constitution. So what they give us here is a note on sources. So now we're looking for all the documentation that proves it's godless. Well, right up top they say we have dispensed with the usual scholarly apparatus of footnotes. Whoa, time out. You say it's a godless constitution, but you're not going to document that. We just have to trust you. And so what they say is, oh, everyone knows this, so we're not going to use any footnotes. We're not going to document. What an amazing thing for an academic textbook to give no sources for their citations except just trust us. We're PhDs. We know what we're talking about.
Wow.
Now, that's widely used. Most students don't know the difference. They don't know to go ask those guys. No. Why do you say that? Why do you say it's godless? Why do you say the founding fathers are atheist, agnostic? Where's your proof? Oh, everybody knows it. That's a very poor excuse for saying that it's godless. On the other side, you got books like that one, Original Intent, that says exactly the opposite. 1,500 footnotes. 87% of the footnotes come from the founding fathers' own life while they were still alive. So when you use their documents, you reach a conclusion that says it's not godless. When you ignore all the documents, you can say, trust us, it's godless constitution. And this is revisionism designed to have an impact on our behavior and our policy. So what happens is judges will quote that and say it's a godless constitution, so you can't have this religious liberty, this religious display, whatever. But that's not based on history. Now, the intellectual side comes in and says, well, if it's not godless, what proof is there that God's involved in it? And there are half a dozen proofs that unequivocally show the Constitution not only is not godless, it is very Christian in its construction orientation. America is now the longest ongoing constitutional republic in the history of the world. Our Constitution was an original and unique American document. It was not a compilation of the best clauses of other constitutions from across the world. No, our Constitution contained ideas that had not before appeared in written constitutions. New and novel practices like the separation of powers and checks and balances. Practices like republicanism. So where did the founders get their specific ideas for this most successful of all constitutions? In an attempt to answer this question, a group of political scientists embarked on an ambitious 10-year project to analyze some 15,000 writings from the founding era. Those writings were examined with the goal of isolating and identifying the specific political sources quoted during the era surrounding the establishment of American government. If the source of the quotes could be identified, then the origin of the founders' political ideas could be determined. From the 15,000 writings selected, the researchers isolated some 3,154 quotations and documented the original sources of those quotes. It turned out that the single most quoted source in the writings of the founding era was the Bible. 34% of the documented quotes were taken from the Bible, a percentage almost 4 times higher than the second most quoted source. In fact, signers of the Constitution George Washington and Alexander Hamilton confirmed that the separation of powers was based on the biblical principle found in Jeremiah 17:9, a verse that had been the subject of numerous sermons during the founding era. Many other Bible verses and principles also find embodiment in the Constitution. For example, compare the Article 1, Section 8 provision on uniform immigration laws with Leviticus 19:34. The Article 2, Section 1 provision that a president must be a natural-born citizen, compare that with Deuteronomy 17:15. Then the Article 3, Section 3 provision regarding witnesses and capital punishment, compare that with Deuteronomy 17:6. And the Article 3, Section 3 provision against attainder, compare that with Ezekiel 18:20. And notice that Isaiah 33:22 sets forth three branches of government, and Ezra 7:24 establishes the type of tax exemptions that the founders gave to our churches and which still exist today. And the concept of republicanism set forth in Article 4, Section 4, that is, of electing our leaders at the local, county, state, and federal levels, has its origins in Exodus 18:21. In fact, Noah Webster, the founder personally responsible for Article 1, Section 8, Paragraph 8 of the U.S. Constitution, specifically cites Exodus 18:21. And John Jay and George Washington also attributed religious causes as the reason that America elected its own leaders. Understanding that many of the ideas that found embodiment in our government were taken from the Bible, it's not surprising that John Adams had identified Christians and ministers as being so influential in American independence. In fact, nearly 4 decades after the American Revolution, John Adams reaffirmed this position, declaring,
"The general principles on which the fathers achieved independence were the general principles of Christianity. Now I will avow that I then believed and now believe that those general principles of Christianity are as eternal and immutable as the existence and attributes of God."
A closer look into our nation's history reveals surprising and irrefutable evidence of the Bible's influence on our founding fathers and our nation's Constitution. But does a biblically inspired Constitution make America a Christian nation? And is there a place for the Bible in today's modern political climate? Discover our nation's godly history in the American Heritage series. America, this is your heritage.
There was a great study done some years ago by political science professors. They said, you know, the Constitution is a remarkable document. It has ideas that have never before been written down in any previous Constitution. These are novel ideas. Where did the Founding Fathers get these novel ideas? Because our Constitution is not a collection of the world's greatest constitutions.
Right.
I mean, in 1787, they didn't say, oh, let's take 2 clauses from the French Constitution, 2 from the Russian, let's take 1 from the Haitian, 1 from the Helvetican. These are brand new ideas. So these ideas put in a piece of paper, they've been talked about, but they've never been put in a document. Where did they get their ideas? These political science professors determined that if they could collect 15,000 writings out of the founding era, read those writings and see who they quoted, they would know where the founders get their ideas. They'd know where those ideas, their origins. So they took those 15,000 writings, took them a decade to document, but they found 3,154 direct quotes in those documents. They took all of those direct quotes back to their original source. End of a decade, they'd say, we've studied it, we know where every one of these quotes came from, we know the source. Turned out the #1 most cited source in the founding era when the Constitution was constructed was the Bible. 34% of all quotes. The next cited source was Montesquieu at 8.3%. So you're talking a 4-time differential between your #1 source, the Bible, and #2, Montesquieu. Then you come to Blackstone at 7.9, then Locke at 2.3, and on down through your sources. So the Bible, far and away, many times over, is the most cited source during the time when the Constitution was written. That's a pretty good indication it's not a godless document. Numbers of other founding fathers and early American political leaders also declared that America was guided by or founded on Christian principles. Among those making such declarations were Elias Boudinot, a president of Congress during the Revolution, and signers of the Declaration Charles Carroll, John Hancock, Benjamin Rush, Stephen Hopkins, and Samuel Adams. Also citing Christian principles as foundational were Constitution signers George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, Rufus King, John Dickinson, and Roger Sherman. Others making similar declarations about Christian principles in America include Samuel Chase, a signer of the Declaration and a U.S. Supreme Court Justice, original Supreme Court Chief Justice John Jay, Justice Joseph Story, Justice James Kent, Zephaniah Swift, author of America's first legal text, and the U.S. Supreme Court itself, not to mention the U.S. Congress, as well as numerous state Supreme Courts and state legislatures.